Alright, welcome to my channel again if you're watching. Um, I'm not sure how long this video is going to be, but bear with me, because I have something to say. Now, this isn't a new phenomenon exactly, but I think I can add some context to it in modern ages, and so on. So basically, there's this concept of the pre-Christian, the Christian, and the post-Christian, or the pagan Christian, and then like nihilistic or atheistic or materialist um, age of Western civilization. And it basically goes many gods, one god, no god, many gods. And there's like a cycle of it, basically. And basically, we're at the return of the strong gods, as opposed to Jesus, meek and mild, kind of in a sense. But we might be returning to the meek god who's strong, stronger than the strong gods at least, in the back end of things. Kind of how like a tank doesn't win a war, it wins a battle, but like the logistics structure and framework wins the war, even though you don't see it in the battlefield necessarily. Front versus back strength, back end strength, right? One wins the war, one wins the battle, basically. Logistics and a tank or something, respectively, for front and back, or back and front, and war versus battle one. Anyways, not to get too off um, topic on what I was initially thinking of here, but basically, I did a talk with Grok, and like, I'm the sort of Christian that watches Hellraiser Judgment with its half naked woman bathing in blood, and comes away with like a moral framework understanding that's like better than it was before, or like watches the horror film Mad God and comes away with a very Christian understanding of the world that wasn't immediately obvious to me before I watched it. And basically, what it is I'll explain basically what the theological understanding is. Hellraiser Judgment is two things that are moral lessons I learned. It shows what happens when someone projects their own sin onto others, and what it would actually look like if good needed evil to survive or mean anything. Like, that's the world that would exist if those two things were true, basically. And then Mad God, I came away with the understanding, essentially, shortly after watching it, that it's a very Christian understanding of the prophets before Jesus Christ, where essentially there's a ticking time bomb, and it's supposed to blow up hell, and then the person gets sacrificed, but the bombs keep piling up, and eventually someone's going to succeed and blow up hell. And that's what Jesus Christ represents. So it's like a vision of the Old Testament prophets in some sense. And those are the Christian understandings that I came away with those two movies. And so basically, if there's something that means something or has a statement or takes a stand on something somehow, or even if it gets it wrong, I can grapple with it and be like, okay, here's the corrective or the right approach. I can understand it in some sense. But if it's this vaporwave sort of nothing matters, anything can be anything, nihilistic, sort of like airy fairy kind of mush, gray goo kind of everything's the same, nothing has any meaning, um, thing, it rubs me absolutely the wrong way. So I'll give you an example of the kinds of things that are not Christian, Or actually, I'll go into the Christian thing. So basically, for a long time, I've been kind of obsessive with Christianity and like, I've been using it as like studies of Christianity as like a good luck charm, basically, to avoid pissing off God, basically. And I've kind of grown bored of it in some sense. But I feel like I'm maturing in some ways, and I'm sort of coming back around to my old self before schizo hit and Christianity became a very big, important thing. But it's like it's the hero's journey in some sense. You start at the beginning and then you return to the beginning at the end when you've done all your journeying in some sense. Return to the old self or return to the old place with eyes renewed, vision renewed, and so on. Sort of like how you the Jungian thing of like being a child, growing into an adult, and then becoming getting in touch with your inner child again as you're older or something. You know, as an elder, a senior. It's kind of like that. I think in a way. I'm not entirely sure if this is the way God wants me to do it exactly, but I'm beginning to think coming back to myself as I was before in a certain sense, but wiser and more diligent and discerning and so on is kind of where I think God is like allowing me to go, and He's not too unhappy about it necessarily. And basically, what happened was a lot of the Christian stuff takes on this vaporwave aesthetic of like words, words, words. They don't mean anything or something. The aesthetic of it, at least, right? Like they might mean something, but like I've listened to so much Christianity that's like beginning to like numb, be numbing, mind numbing, mind numbing in my experiences. So I'm gravitating back towards things that make me feel something in some ways. And the lesson here is that I'm more of a person who would rather feel pain than nothing at all. And basically, that's like the thing. That's one of the experiences that I have in some sense, and it's a very common experience for people in some sense. That aversion to being dead inside, even if it means panic, fear, and terror, and pain, and agony, and suffering, to have any meaning at all. Anyways, examples of the sorts of things that I can tolerate as a Christian: Hellraiser Judgment, Mad God, Motorhead song Orgasmotron, um, Ghost Rider with Nicolas Cage, or Ghost Rider Vengeance, I think is what it's called, or something. Those kinds of movies, noir detective stuff. Taxi Driver is a good one. Um, Conan the Barbarian, Barbarella. You know, Logan, The Death of Robin Hood, Leon the Professional, um, even The Green Knight in some sense, a little bit. Not very much, but a little bit. Um, Prometheus, um, 2001: A Space Odyssey. They have something that rubs me the wrong way, basically, in some sense. But like they represent something in some level. They actually have like a meaning to them, and they take a stand in some sense. And the difference between 1 and 0 and 1 and 100 is that 1 to 100 is only 100 times more, but 1/0 is infinitely more. So yeah. So basically, if you're a nothing represent if you represent nothing, you're worse off than if you represent less than. And if you're less than, you're worse off than more than representing for the healthy ordering of society and self. And what I'm deciding is I cannot personally find the heights of meaning by being a really great G. Golly Willikers Christian. It's not in my nature. You know, like it's. I cannot be a totally up, upbeat, wholesome, heckin' wholesome Christian. It's not in my nature. But I am very spirited. And I do have a care for people on a level that is heightened by my own suffering. So, despite my scrupulosity, despite the fact that I always tell myself I'm never good enough, even with Jesus Christ and so on, at least until recently, somewhat, and I've been wrestling with it actively for about a week or two or three. After about 5 years or 3 or 4 years of this, no, about 7 years of this whole like I'm the worst person ever and so on, and nothing is good from me ever, no matter what, and so on. And basically, I caused a lot of misery when I was before God came into my life, and I experienced a bunch of misery after God came into my life. But I'm now aiming towards some sort of joy and like gentle stewarding of the gifts and responsibilities God's given me to like just be good because Jesus is perfect for me in some sense. In a human who isn't Jesus, because Jesus is human and God, man and God, fully each, Jesus can be perfect and good. But in a human, because our understanding and desires are twisted, all of us, on some level, even our imagination of what's perfect is not actually perfect. We have no idea. Well, we do have some idea of what's good, but we have no idea of what's perfectly good. But Jesus does. So we aim for the good towards Jesus in some fashion. But we don't have to be perfect. So if we see reality through a mirror darkly, then so be it. And I'm sure this is one of those things that Christians go through when they first convert. They try and be as holy as possible in some sense. And like they're really like uptight and like I can't do that, that's a sin. I can't do that, that's a sin for like everything. And I'm now gradually normalizing to a decent Christian and decent person, I think, doing personal responsibilities and enjoying my own life a little bit and sort of getting off the holy roller kind of mindset into a more layperson um, experience in a certain sense. And I'm not saying that being a holy roller is a terrible thing at all times, but like you have to kind of, you cannot sustain it properly indefinitely. You're going to crash eventually. And basically, I just kept crashing and burning out on Christianity and then forcing myself anyways and stuff and just experiencing misery. It's not that I'm not going to be a Christian. It's that I'm going to be a very spirited and very, I don't want to say worldly exactly, but like kind of like down to earth kind of Christian in some sense. I'm not going to be hoity toity, high and mighty, holier than thou exactly, but I'm going to have some standards in like general direction of travel and like values. And it's simultaneously that I have to relax and chill out, but also be more aware and just diligent in some other ways. And that's confusing because it's like, oh, how do you navigate, because it's not just about like a line spectrum, a spectrum on a line. It's like there's like different interlocking mechanisms. It's like a 3 or 4 dimensional puzzle for like how to actually be better than you were before while not burning out and being miserable. And basically there's like if you imagine you're holy because you're riding everyone's asses for scrupulosity or religious OCD reasons, then you're not actually being more holy, is what Jesus basically says. You're just being a Pharisee. Basically, a very pious hypocrite. And you're not supposed to force yourself to be holy. It's not how it's supposed to work. And it took me ages to understand this. But basically, there's a system that I use now that I just came up with this morning, July the 4th, where basically what I have is a general layout of 3 different positions, or maybe 4 different positions. There's the Bible, first off, the top. Then there's gets a lot of stuff right and only a little bit wrong, more or less pretty good. Then there's it takes a principled stand on something, even if it's wrong. And finally, there's doesn't stand for anything except dissolution or dissolving everything, which is death inside your soul. It's the dead inside feeling in some sense. And the takes a principled stand on something even when it's wrong is not the highest, but the reason why ideology sometimes takes over people and so on is because it's the easiest level to gravitate towards, that's above zero, above dead inside. You stand for something. You might not stand for a lot, but you stand for something. Or you think you stand for something. And then the whole question of like the deceitfulness of the flesh kind of comes into play, and like what does it mean to be an ideologue or like someone captured by ideology instead of true faith, or being cultured or something like that. And what it means to be spiritual in some sense and so on. And it's like, okay, you're going to be a big hypocrite if you're an ideologue, if you do ideology, if you get like, so if you only stand principled, if your only principled stand is on like one topic, you're going to be a hypocrite in a lot of ways. You know, if you're an ideology person, you're going to be wrong in a lot of ways, but at least you're standing for something. The next step is to rise above that to the cultured or spiritual. Um, Most of the things are correct. There's a couple things off, but it's pretty good. Kind of um, um, level, which is cultured or spiritual in some sense, wise on some level, and the ideology is worldly wise, and the dead inside feeling is worldly wise, and so on. The stands for nothing or stands for one thing out of 100. Stands for 70 things out of 100 is more difficult, which is why people don't go to it as much. But it's a richer experience in some ways and rewarding, and people can easily understand it when they get a clue on it, a clue about it, and they really like it, and so on. Then there's the next level, which is the Bible understanding. Now, the Bible understanding, as far as I can tell, there's sort of like there's a if you're climbing the holy mountain, right? There's like two or three ways to go up it. There's a staircase that's very steep that goes straight up. There's a staircase that's pretty steep and it goes sort of slightly zigzag. And then there's like a switchback trail that goes zigzag across the entire mountain. The zigzag and the switchback only go most of the way. Well, you know what I mean? So for the final ascent, you need the Bible, which is the staircase straight up. The good thing is that God respects you climbing the holy mountain at all. You don't have to get to the very top for God to accept you. You just need to make the journey as best as you can to the top, and where you are is where you are based on the limitations you have as a person, as long as you're making the effort to climb it. And it can be like one little shuffle step at a time before camping for a year at the base camp or something. Well, maybe not the base camp because that's not climbing at all. But it could be like a single shuffled step or something, and God will be like, "Bravo, good job," for some people. Or it can be climbing like 80% of the way up for some people, and God will be like, "Bravo, congratulations." It's the upward direction that God respects, basically. Now, He doesn't expect perfection, so when you're getting to the top and you're exhausted and it's low oxygen and there's so many things you begin to get overwhelmed by everything you could do perfectly, supposedly, that you don't know how to do perfectly, or you do know how to but you don't have the energy to, but you're a high performer. He'll basically be like, okay, well, you're just gonna shuffle step upwards a little bit once in a while from now on. Yeah. And the promise of heaven is that not only will we get to the top in heaven from wherever our highest point is in this life, but we'll begin to fly from the top of the mountain to the stars, right? Like that's the metaphor basically. Galactic conquest of heaven from wherever we are on the mountain, as long as we've made our efforts to journey up it. So basically, the other spiritual traditions like Buddhism or Shinto, maybe Shintoism, but Buddhism or Judaism, not really Islam that much to be honest, but it has a little bit here and there once in a while. Not much. Very low level. Um, but Buddhism and Judaism are like a bunch of the way up. Torah, not Talmud Judaism, by the way. So they can go up part of the way on the holy mountain as their top level, but Christianity is the full top level. Or rather, Jesus Christ is the top of the mountain, and we get to like vision. We can see him from where we our top is, or something, as Christians, or something like that. It's sort of how I'm treating it, basically. But the joy of heaven, if we make our efforts to go up, is that God will facilitate our going up further in due time. To get better and be better than you were before is supposed to be a joy on some level. And I'm saying this because I don't regret, like, as much as I don't want it to happen again, basically, the suffering I endured, which, if you can see the scars on me from my third video, Battle Scars Fighting Sin, third oldest video, or, yeah, third oldest video. Like, I don't regret facing that stuff in the past, if as long as it doesn't happen again. To get to where I am now, basically, hopefully. It was worth it to get to where I am spiritually in some sense. Now, I don't want that level of suffering to happen again or anything like it or even close to it. But I don't regret the past stuff being necessary to get me to where I am now. All the trauma, all the hardship, all the suffering, all the agony, and all that. I don't want to be like a hero and like go through all that again or something. But like experiencing it in the first place was worth it as long as I don't have to go through it again. Because it taught me to be a better person in some sense and to actually rely on other people and talk with other people and like learn to interact with other people and socialize and like take responsibility for my wrongdoing and stuff like that. And I'm saying this even as also for the next 5 years or so, or 6 years or so, I was basically paralyzed with indecision and like lack of self care and stuff like that. And like living conditions that are substandard. And so on. Like even with all of that, even with all of the suffering I went through and the homelessness and like the feeling of lostness and despair and the physical pain and agony and stuff like that, as long as it leads towards a better future, I don't begrudge it. A better future for me and better me because of it. A better me and a better future for me. I don't mind it. I just hope it succeeded the first time, in some sense. Um, and basically, what I learned is I am only slightly biblically oriented, or what's exclusively biblical oriented. I'm a very spirited guy, so like a noir detective story, or like the original Robert E. Howard Conan the Barbarian, or like like some sort of like cowboy kind of story, like Shane the Gunman. There's a movie called Shane. It's kind of like the movie Logan, except the guy survives instead of dying. Basically, what I'm saying is I'm beginning to rest on my comfort level higher than I was before. And these, but like there's this. Here, I'll read out what it is. So, what Grok said is you can handle pagan, violent, or rebellious stories if they have coherent belief and order. What grates you is the modern tendency towards inversion, like women replacing men in archetypal roles, relativism, nihilistic aesthetics, or emptiness, vaporwave, multiverses, or much of current pop music and rap. And then what it says is we're building a pretty clear map of what works for you. Clear moral gravity, yes, check mark. Ar- archetypal roles, heroism or sacrifice, yes. Pagan, rebellious but coherent worldviews, yes. Relativism, inversion, or nihilistic emptiness, definite no. And basically, I'm beginning to understand why C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien were Christians, but borrowed from paganism in some sense. And that's really one of the motivations for me kind of accepting this in some sense. Because, like, if some of the better Christians of the world were inspired and enchanted by paganism in some ways, on some level, then, like, it's sort of like you're not abandoning Christianity, but you're embracing, like, certain human truths within paganism. Whereas the nihilism is, like, a definite no. Yeah. And what this means is basically postmodernism is out, pre modernism or modernism are in. Basically, I will feel paganism. I will believe faith Christian. And I will abhor or dislike um, postmodernism or nihilism or atheism or secularism or materialism. Well, depends on how you define secularism, actually. Um, because in the original sense, it meant like the um, I think in the original sense, secular just meant like layman of the church, not the priest, or like the government official enforcing laws that are based on Christian morality but not like direct commandments of Christianity. So like for instance, there's no law against being greedy, but greediness is a sin. Envy is a commandment not to be that way, but it's not against the law either. Now stealing is against the law, and that's valid under Christianity. Um that sort of thing. Fraud is against the law too. Yeah. So you're not legislating morality in the sense of like what a leftist says or a right winger says, but you are legislating morality in a technical sense when you apply the law to humans. Because you're telling them what they should and shouldn't do and what punishments you'll get to discourage what you shouldn't do. And that is based on amorality of some sort, or it's based on amorality. Like there's a morality or there's amorality, and basically the joke there is if you put a space between a and morality, then it's like you have a single morality, and if you put it no space between the two, then you have a complete lack of morality. And a complete lack of morality is immorality or anti-moral. And that gets into legalism and moralism and so on. But basically, my compromise with myself and others in some sense is going to be good is good enough. You don't have to be perfect. Jesus Christ is perfect for us. Like I was saying earlier. And that's why, but basically, like, for instance, the Hellraiser Judgment or Mad God thing, or Barbarella or Conan the Barbarian, like, is that, like, it believes in something. I can work with something that believes in something even if it's wrong. But if it doesn't have any true beliefs whatsoever, then I cannot stand it whatsoever. So a lot of modern culture and mainstream culture is basically like right out of the picture for me. And it's really easy to be, you know, the old phrase, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. Like that's kind of what they're saying about that. You know, and if you stand for a bunch of things, then you're going to have conflicts that you need to resolve carefully or finesse them or like negotiate with the conflicts, and you're going to have to hierarchy hierarchy hierarchically or basically form a hierarchy of higher goods and lower goods and rank them and like the intensity and so on and so on. You're going to have to do this as like a sort of experience and personal judgment sort of thing, like based on personal decision making and memory and so on. So there's basically three things that matter: the heart, the mind, and memory. Problem solving for the mind, the general disposition towards things and people and living entities and so on, the heart, and your experiences that tell you things about how things happened when you saw them occur. And basically, what the Bible is and what the progressive revelation thing about Scripture is, that in some sense, it's basically like the reason why the Bible was written over thousands of years is because God is interacting with the world in real time, over time, to teach right and wrong, the healthiest and the unhealthiest, to teach the difference between the two so we pick the healthy and the right and the good, not the evil. And basically, what happens is the old human thing of like, if you get told not to do something or told that is dangerous, you like you want to do it more for some reason. Like our desires are like off in some sense. Um, you kind of understand why God would tell us stories as opposed to say like this is going to happen. So it's not like he's telling us like if you get drunk you're going to throw up. He's going to like remember he's going to say remember that guy that threw up? He was drunk that you saw like 2 days ago or something. Or he'll be like remember the last time you drunk? You drank? You threw up. You know, like it's going to be like this memory part to it that actually, and that's why the Bible is stories primarily with some commandments, but a lot of stories. But they're honest and truthful to the general situation in a applicable way, in the same way J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings is not a one-to-one allegory for anything, but it's generally applicable, but takes the shape and contours of the human life as we understand it in our context. So basically, to go back to that whole like hero's journey thing and the return trip to home where you started to leave in the first place on your adventure, um, I think I'm finally beginning, possibly. I'm not sure about this, but I think maybe I'm beginning to normalize. Not exactly back to my old self, but sort of like um, the new version of me in some sense. So it's still going to be me, but it's the new version of me. And I'm waiting the perfect version, the totally new version of me in heaven, basically. This doesn't mean I won't make progress in the future, hopefully, but it means that I think I'm done the hard catch up study after being an atheist for like 30 years and like being really scrupulosity oriented and like fearing God and being terrorized by everything, the infinite, um, for 7 6 7 years and so on. I think the hard part's over now, basically. The really hard part. And basically, what this is there's a parallel to this, which is Kierkegaard's three spheres of life: the aesthetic sphere, which is like drinks, games, food, drugs, right? The pleasure seeking. Then there's the ethical sphere, where you get your kicks by being a pillar of the community in some sense. Not totally, but like you're trying to apply universal laws to human nature and like find exactly the right thing that fits everyone that everyone should do and so on. And then the third level is the religious sphere, and that goes back to the person. The aesthetic sphere is personal, the ethical sphere is universal, and the religious sphere is personal. But there's another part to it, which is once you hit the religious sphere and you finally progress to the end of it, you actually sort of like find this sort of like experience where you're actually free to traverse the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious spheres like at will almost in some sense. So you're not just like so it's like you're building the first step or you're at the first step to begin with. That's the aesthetic. Then you sort of build into the ethical and then you build into the religious. And at the religious sphere, you're able to walk down the stairs and up the stairs on all three floors or levels basically on a whim because you've constructed the house essentially, the mansion or whatever. Right? Like it's like you finally can use it and so on. Now, if you're thinking of this like a tool, you've got it wrong in a very significant way. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but it's more like a fish navigating the water than it is like building a tool and knowing how to use it because you've thought it out. It has to be experienced and lived through to that point, and then you'll be ready to tr- um, trans transpose into the the final step, the final stage of being, where you can flip between the three almost instinctually in some sense. I believe I'm beginning to do that. I'm not there yet. Now, don't get me wrong. You're never going to be perfect at it, but you're always going to make mistakes in this life as a human. But like you'll be like pretty good doing it basically, and it won't be like a cheap like cop out. You know what I mean? Like the aesthetic sphere could be you just enjoy gardening or something, or you enjoy playing video games once in a while or something, or talking with friends. You know what I mean? Like it could be like that kind of like level of like it's just enjoyable. And then maybe politics or culture is like your ethical sphere or philosophy or something. So you can enjoy that. And then the religious sphere is like the relationship with God and like the holy hour or the holy ground or the holy experience. And that could be a thing too. And because I'm not actually there yet necessarily, I cannot promise you that you can control the religious sphere. I don't even know if you can necessarily totally control the ethical or the aesthetic sphere. Um, but I don't want to say you're totally powerless either. It's not about like power necessarily from you. It's more like it's not willpower, by the way. You can't really force yourself to be good at doing this. It's sort of like you loosen up as a new Christian eventually, and you kind of like begin to vibe and just go with the flow of like which sphere, the aesthetic, the ethical, or the religious sphere, is the most appropriate to what God is presenting to you in the moment. And my guess is that's what's meant by you can control your attitude towards what life gives you, not necessarily what life gives you. But there is a truth, which is that control on your part is an illusion, but influence is real, I believe, is the proper way to approach it. And what that essentially means is you can't make yourself get a better life. God will provide you with the opportunity to do so, and then you will influence what that life will look like in negotiation or dialogue with God, who has the control, but you can influence in some sense. Now, I know they say God is like never changes and is like perpetually the same and so on, but I want to state, say, and express that there is in fact a biblical passage where God negotiates with Abraham to essentially spare Lot and his family from Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham essentially goes, "Please don't destroy the town because or the city because I don't want those people to die." And then God's like, "Oh, but they're so evil, I have to." And then Abraham's like, "What if there's only? Could you possibly do like if there's 50 good people?" And God's like, fine, but there aren't. So Abraham's like, can you possibly do it if there's 40 good people? And God's like, I can avoid it if there is, but there isn't. So essentially, Abraham negotiates them down to 10 good people. I would say like 10,000 or 100,000 people. So it's like pretty lenient. And basically, what God says is, I can do that, but there aren't that many. There are not that many, as it turns out. There's not even 10 good people. So then, like, I think Abraham was like, could you just get Lot's family? Like, his name is literally Lot, Lot. Can you get Lot's family out of the city so they can be saved? I'm not sure if he does that exactly, but like, basically, God does send two angels to get them out of the city. And Abraham's like kind of like part of the reason I think why that happened. Basically, what I'm saying is there's a biblical story that basically points to the fact that God will, despite the fact that God has all the power in the universe, literally, He will treat you like you deserve some say in how your life is oriented. He will actually negotiate with you, kind of like a father to their children, out of patience and love, not lack of power. Because he doesn't want to crush the child. And that is, in fact, one of the things I appreciate about God. And I will say also something. and what I'm about to say, and what I'm about to say is a bit of a new thing too for me, which is I've stopped listening to John Piper of Desiring God. The Calvinists emphasize way too much God does everything. They leave no room for the human to do anything except bad things. And that is a very inappropriate way of approaching it, I think. It's not very helpful to a Christian if they're prone to scrupulosity or religious OCD, which means obsessive compulsive disorder. Personally, I've found Father Mike Schmitz of Ascension Presents and Sundays with Ascension, or Bishop Robert Barron, 2 R's in Barron. Otherwise, it's the same as like a Baron, like B. His name is Barron. Um, Bishop Barron and Father Mike Schmitz. Personally, I found as a very scrupulosity oriented individual, the Catholics have a better approach to resolving the issues you face as a Christian. Personally. Um, and all of this video, essentially up until this point, came about because I stopped listening to Calvinists and started listening to Catholics more often and stopped beating myself up all the goddamn time and like thought about my actual like what moves me in some sense. And basically what I decided was heavy metal and synthwave is my aesthetic, and a vaporwave and modern rap and modern pop music is not my aesthetic. And it like basically what synthwave is Synthwave derives from vaporwave, but it's like a rebellion of meaningfulness against meaninglessness or meaninglessness. And heavy metal sort of has that sort of like edge to it that's kind of like it 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 riffs the soul. RIFFS. It's like a it plays to the soul in some level. And part of what I was thinking is like even the satanic heavy metal is like in some ways like less satanic, despite the fact that it's like oh Satan roar and stuff like that. It's less satanic than like vaporwave or like those songs that are like I just want to sleep with you, I don't want to live with you, or like I'll give you my body one night but I'm not going to give you my heart, like those kinds of songs. Or like the I'm so pimpin', I sleep with 20 bitches, I murder my enemies all the time and stuff like that. It's less satanic than those songs. Even if it is like actually like Hail Satan because we're the rebels and we hate bossy people. You know, or like we hate control freaks, kind of like the punks and the early heavy metal people and so on. You know, um, there's something to society over the last 60 years where things have mattered less and less to people, and things have gotten worse and worse to people. For people, I should say. And that's partly what people mean by the ease and comfort leading to bad outcomes as opposed to the heroic and the um, aspirational and so on. I'm sure if you've listened this far, you'll have your own idea of how this ties together. But I think I've explained some of the biblical stuff in my own journey so far, and some of the concepts that I've been playing about with, and so on. And this is just how I understand it in a way that works for me so far. I don't know if it'll continue to work. I don't know if I'm on the right path at the moment. But this feels, and I think as well, that this is about the right position for someone like me. My comfort level, desiring to be with God, desiring to be Christian, but also like having a very like vaporwave experience with modern Christian teaching while also being like too scrupulosity oriented and like too guilt ridden in some sense over every little thing, and like taking the blame for things that I'm not even responsible for in some sense, like Epstein or Ukraine Russian war or COVID and like all these other things, because of my schizo. And this is like my, or psychotic break rather. It was a long term one, but I think I'm recovering now. But I'm not sure. I think I am. Mostly recovered. Maybe I won't be more so, but I am at the moment, so. And it's a fairly manageable level now. Um, this is my understanding of how things operate with the re-enchantment of the world as I experience it from the materialist world and so on. And this is my sort of like calming down and relaxing and like still working on things, but like not making it my force myself priority to. or force myself every day to kind of thing. Like not a like Sigma grind set basically. It's not the Sigma grind set anymore. And I'm actually kind of comfortable this way. I know they say don't be comfortable as a Christian, but honestly, um, you know, they also command to rest. So it's like, okay, comfortable versus rest, discomfort versus restlessness. You know, no rest for the wicked. Okay, but am I wicked? You know. So basically, in human terms, comfortable and rested, and there's a vitality to my experience all of a sudden when I allow myself to partake in things that have some sort of principled stand, even if it's not perfect, even if it's not like the absolute best stance, as long as it has some sort of meaning, because then I can grapple with it and like make my own assessment of how to correct the approach that it takes for my own life in fiction, from fiction. But meaninglessness itself in fiction is like utter poison to me now. And basically, this is the conscious distinction I'm making. There's the Bible, which is the top. Okay, well, I'm not so great at that, but I can do it once in a while. And then I get burnt out pretty quickly. But then there's like the mostly right, and that's pretty good and edifying and like freshening and so on. And then there's it's right about something, and that's like kind of like it's still kind of exciting in a way, but like it's also like kind of a little worrisome in some other ways and so on. So I have to like be careful about it for my own soul's sake or experience's sake. And then there's meaninglessness, which is like I just hate it completely. And basically, what I'm doing is I'm allowing myself, as long as it has some sort of meaning and takes a principled stand on something, to like be okay with it and like not hate it, essentially, and not be like totally bothered if it's not perfect. But the thing is, this is also as a warning coming from someone that's naturally spirited, so wants to believe in something, and has had troubles in the past because they've had attachments to lesser goods, and then became super want to be holy to my own misery for a long, long time. So it's like you might have to go through a process sort of like mine, maybe not as extreme, but a process with similar steps in some ways. Not exactly the same. Doesn't have to be as harsh maybe, but like similar steps in some ways to what I'm doing. The same direction, even if it's like a tenth or a hundredth of this of the distance in that direction for each step of the way. And what I want to say is also there's a it's pretty simple, it's pretty easy to understand, but basically I have a system for right and wrong, or a concept for right and wrong that might help, that I just want to add to the talk, add to it, and so on. Nietzsche had slave and master morality. I don't believe in slave and master morality. I believe in slave and master mentality. So the mindset of a slave and master, not the morals. The morals, the morality is between pillar and pillager. Pillar of the community holds it up. Pillager takes what they can get through force or anything else, or by lying, fraud, deceit, stealing, force. A slave and a master mentality, someone who's a slave and someone who's a master, who are both pillars, have more in common with each other than a slave and a master who are pillagers have with the pillars. The difference is not slave and master that matters the most. It's between pillar and pillager. And I want to say this explicitly. Oppressor oppressed leftism or third worldism or Islamic, like people that say Islamophobia and stuff, um, believe the slave is always the pillar and the master is always the pillager. The corporate world, mega corporations, treat the master as the pillar and the slave as a pillager only. They're both wrong. They're the opposite of each other and they're both wrong. A slave and a master who are pillars have more in common with each other than they have with a slave or a master who are pillagers. And I hope that with that understanding, possibly we could begin to build a better society again. So we don't envy and we don't denigrate those below us as long as they're pillars. But if they're pillagers, as the elite, or pillagers as the underclass, we do denigrate them.